Thank you very much. Thank you, Robert. And indeed, mutual assured destruction is alive and well, and it keeps us safe, which is an odd thing about it. Thank you guys so much for coming out, and thank you for having me. I can't tell you how thrilling it is to be here. Indeed, I do. I love liberty. We lived up in Washington for about 15 years in a little row house, and after about 15 years of living in the city, it was really nice. You share walls with your neighbors, and every winter you get into a fight of furnace chicken to see who turns the furnace on first. And since I like to keep a cold house, I would make my neighbors turn their furnaces on first, and they would heat my house until along about January, and then you have to give that up. But living in the city for us was not long-term viable for us. So we moved back home, back where Robert lives, down in Chatham, but I go back up to D.C. And so I always come through here usually twice a week, and whether I'm stopping to see Robert or stop to get a cup of coffee or whatever, I always know Liberty students when I run into them, and they're the best students. They're the best people, always bright-eyed, always, and I can't tell you what a thrill it is and how much, and I really mean this, I hope it doesn't sound corny, but it gives me hope when I see students around here for the future of our country, because in a lot of ways I think our country's in a lot of trouble in a lot of ways, and we need new recruits to do great things, and that's what you guys are going to do.
Amen. So, and I thought just to begin, I wanted to say we've got a mic over here, and Charlie's going to talk for 15, 20 minutes. What we really want, and what I know you really want, is for us to have some questions and answers. So if you, at the appropriate time when we call you up, there'll be a mic over here, and so if there are folks that have questions, if you'll make your way over there and ask questions at the mic. I wanted to get started,
But let me also say, in terms of questions, just so you know, I am unoffendable, and you can ask any question you want, and I'm coming from Washington, so like the more hostile the question, the more at home I'll feel, so anybody can ask anything.
Charlie, so we've got Helms students, government students here. We have law students. Do we have some folks from the communication school? Any journalism students here?
Nice, excellent.
Yeah. So you got your start in journalism, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you pursued that career and a little bit about the start of that in Detroit.
We should have those old Army posters made up to say, "We need you." And if you watch any of the impeachment proceedings, you get a real sense of why we need good reporters. I was blessed in that all I've ever wanted to do was work for newspapers. Never wanted to do anything else. I was interested in politics, interested in other things. All I ever wanted to do was work for a newspaper. I loved the idea of tracking, holding powerful people accountable. I loved exposing wrongdoing by powerful people. I love the idea that we can take stories, boil them down to a story, put it in a newspaper, and then you put it out there, and the world can see it. I think that's the only way you arrive at any truth or any semblance of the news. And so I grew up down in Chatham, which I don't know how many of you all know what Chatham is. It's a small, one stoplight town, tobacco town, of about 1,200 people. And I love the town. I love growing up there, but I wanted to do something different. So I managed to get a job at the Detroit News, which was different. And I remember I don't know if you all are familiar with the Devil's Night, which around every Halloween for 3 days, the city, people light houses on fire and turn over cars and do all sorts of mayhem. It started with out of something, I guess, somewhat positive. It was people wanting to burn down the crack houses in their neighborhood because crack houses were where bad things would happen. And so I lit out of Chatham, literally drove out of Chatham, and drove to Detroit. And when I was going up I-75, and I didn't know, this was like 2 days before Halloween. I didn't know what Devil's Night was. And because I was from Chatham, I mean, we have 3 exits. I took the first exit, like the first exit said Detroit. And so I took it, and I didn't realize there would be actually 70 more exits before you got to the exit I was supposed to take. But anyway, so there I'm going on the surface streets, and I'm going around. There are fire trucks everywhere. There are police cars everywhere. There are cars on fire, and there are buildings on fire. And I'm just like driving in my mom's Chevy Caprice thinking, oh my gosh, I cannot believe this is the best thing that has ever happened to me. And if you like news and you like covering news, Detroit was the place to do it. But one thing that obviously, you know, if you're in the law school or in the school of government, maybe you're not into writing newspaper stories, and I get that. But learning to tell stories is sort of the key to everything you do. If you're a lawyer, learning to tell a story, every case you win is because you told the story better, or you told the story the best it could be told. If you're in government and you run for office, you learn to tell those stories, because if you win elective office or you win an argument or you win a debate, all you've done is you've told a story successfully. And whatever profession you're in, I hope that you understand just how important that single aspect of it is. It underlines everything. If you are able to tell a story and convince people of something that they didn't either an opinion they didn't previously hold, or inform them of something that they didn't previously know, then you're going to succeed beyond all of your peers.
Nice. So you were at Detroit News for how many years?
7 years.
7 years, and then you went to the Charlotte Observer, and then went to the New York Post, and then you went from. I mean, and I remember some of the stories that you covered, writing about in Detroit, writing about fire hydrants, where the trucks would roll up and they would attach to fire hydrants that didn't have any water in them. Covering those kinds of stories to all of a sudden covering presidential campaigns, covering the White House. Talk a little bit about the difference and you know what allowed you to do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I've started to notice today in covering Washington politics in Washington is the number of young people who come to Washington having never covered a car crash, having never covered a house fire, having never covered a fire department, anything, and they come because they're interested in politics, and I get that. But they are at a distinct disadvantage, and the reason is because they haven't sort of learned to tell stories the way you do working at a local TV station or a newspaper or whatever, and they're missing something, and they're at a disadvantage, and what I have noticed over the 15 years that I lived, or I guess it's about 20 years ago that we moved to Washington, I think. Let's see, my daughter was born on September 6th, 2001. 9/11 was 5 days later, and then 10 days later, my wife and I loaded up in our 2 cars and drove to Washington. And when we got there, of course, there are Humvees everywhere. Literally, the Pentagon is still smoldering. It was a very strange place, and to think how all of the ways that the country has changed since then, in terms of security and things like that, is pretty daunting to think about. But to me, the most striking thing that I have noticed over that period of time is the degree to which opinion has invaded every aspect of journalism. I hate the word journalism, but newspapers and television news, and every time you turn on the TV, you can see that. And if you watch the coverage of these impeachment hearings, you really do see that. And there was a great unity after 9/11. There was a great unity. The country rallied behind President Bush at that time, and they even rallied together in a large measure to vote for the war in Iraq, which, obviously, that war has divided politics, has determined every presidential primary since then. I would argue that it's still dominating, still dominating the politics today. But also people forget that the Bush administration, one of the things that they did to make the war popular was they embedded reporters with the military in Iraq, and that gave a certain additional cover, and further you sort of unified the country in favor, or at least unified Washington in favor of the concept of going to war in Iraq. But what has sort of happened in the years since then has been kind of astonishing. Covering the final days, the final years of the Bush administration, after the press very much turned hotly against George W. Bush and the war. The guy got blamed for absolutely everything, and obviously he was not very good at sort of defending himself. But then he was followed by the election of President Obama, which by all measures was a proud moment for the country.
Who were you working for when Obama ran?
So I was working for the New York Post at that time, and I loved covering. And Obama was the exciting guy to be covering in 2008, and since so I was working for the New York Post, and if you remember at that time there was someone else running for the nomination. Who was going to be not only the next Democratic nominee, but the next president, and her name was Hillary Clinton. And since she was a hometown girl, we had a reporter covering Hillary full-time, who worked for me in Washington. That meant that I got to cover the Obama campaign, which was a pretty exciting thing. I didn't fawn over him the way I think a lot of people in the media did, but I was, he was interesting. I took him very seriously, and I enjoyed, I thought he was a rare politician who was willing to engage in a serious way, which I found very appealing. But that did not keep me from getting kicked off the campaign plane after.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, so there was a debate. It's not worth going into the particulars of it, but there was a debate at the University of Mississippi with John McCain. This is after Obama had beaten Hillary for the nomination in Iowa. So there was a debate between McCain and Obama, and there was a discussion about the Iraq War, and I wrote a column. Basically laying out the two positions of the two candidates. In no way was it offensive. In no way was it, but it was not on message for the Obama campaign. It was not the message that the campaign wanted, but for that reason, they called me up, confronted me, and said, "This is the worst thing ever." They kicked me off the campaign plane. Which was, I was like, fine. I don't want to cover your campaign anymore anyway, and ended up, covering it on my own. But they wouldn't let me fly with them anymore. But what I thought was interesting about that was how sensitive they were to even things that were not negative. And then fast forward, the guy wins, and he's in the White House. And what I've seen in my profession during that period was. People in newspapers and working on TV, they lost all ability to hold a guy to account, to do their job, basically, to ask questions and to try to get answers out of the administration. It didn't matter. It was like as if they worshiped him. And that went on for 8 years. And the amount of critical coverage, I mean, I could go, it's not worth it, but I could go into just countless really terrific stories, terrifically bad stories that occurred during the Obama administration that nobody at the New York Times or Washington Post ever touched, that nobody at many of the networks ever touched. And that's a really bad place Because we need that kind of inspection of our public leaders. And then, of course, what you're seeing today with the replacement of Obama with Donald Trump, who is, shall we say, an outsider. They've turned, the same adulation and adoration that they had for Obama has turned into this vitriol. And I get it. Donald Trump says things that he probably shouldn't say, and he does things that he probably shouldn't do sometimes. But the blind hatred that you get out of the press, the other thing is that it doesn't, I know tons of Democrats, regular Democrats who don't like Donald Trump, have a good reason for not liking Donald Trump, but they look and they listen to these impeachment hearings and they're like, what are these people talking about? I don't care about any of this stuff. I care about, whatever it is that they get, health care, all these issues. But because of the press has just sort of gone along unquestioningly with the anti-Trump opposition, Democrats, Trump's opponents aren't forced to make good arguments against him. And as somebody who likes Donald Trump, that's very bad. I want a good, loyal opposition. I want Trump's critics to make him better, and just the way I want people on Trump's side to make the other side better. But that's not happening right now.
And you actually write about a little bit of that in a book that you just recently published. Still Winning.
Still Winning.
How'd you come up with the title?
Well, it's really funny. In Washington, no one understands why I wrote the book entitled it Still Winning, because no one in Washington feels like they're winning right now. But I think that I talk to people in normal America, and I've run into a lot of people who feel like they are still winning. And look, I get it about Donald Trump. Donald Trump he is the most impolitic guy. He could be vulgar, which I really don't like. He does a lot of things that create problems, and sometimes unnecessary problems. But Washington is broken. The people in Washington are not doing it right, and they haven't been doing it right for a long time. And the one thing that you can say about Donald Trump and it's why I think that he is such a powerful and good force, is he's not part of Washington. And obviously it means that he comes to Washington and it's like he has to reinvent the wheel every day. He doesn't do anything the way normal presidents do things or normal politicians. I remember the first time I met him, just to give you background, and I explain this in the book, literally, and I think I'm probably the only journalist or reporter in Washington who endorsed Donald Trump literally the day that he announced. I watched his speech, watched him come down the glass escalator, and whether it was the crowd was paid or not, I have no idea. But he gave that speech, and it was so locked into what the concerns of regular people that I know, that I literally, it was like in the movies, I'd filed my column for the day, and I picked up the phone and I called my editor and I was like, hold the presses, kill that column, I'm gonna file another one. And I filed another column endorsing Trump for president. The thing about the guy is, the beauty of him is he's not, he's not part of the problem. And if the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, then Donald Trump was trying something different. But I guess about a year about a year after I after I wrote that column endorsing Donald Trump, he called me the next day. And because, of course, he likes people who like him, which is a very rare thing in politics. Apparently, he's the first politician who likes people who like him. Anyway, so he calls me and he wants to talk about how much he enjoyed my column endorsing him and saying how great he is. And so we talked about it, and it was great. It was hilarious. And I guess really all I knew of him, other than that speech, was his time as on The Apprentice. But he invited me to come with him to campaign and stuff like that, and I had no interest in doing that because I figured at some point, Trump was going to get it wrong and do something really bad, and I was going to have to tear into him and write about how he has forsaken people and he's done something terrible. And I didn't want him to be able to have a picture of me and him going like this so that he could discredit me, because that's his favorite thing to do. Anyway, after about a year, I was like, wow, this guy really does have a political vision. He's doing it right. And so I had a chance to meet him at one of his whatever towers in Las Vegas. And I met him, and we talked for hours. The most Olympic listener you'll ever, the guy listens, which is also a rarity in Washington. Everybody talks in Washington. Donald Trump will sit you down. He doesn't care who you are or where you come from. He wants to ask you questions, and then he listens to your answers. It's a very refreshing thing. But I remember sitting there talking to him, and at some point I'd just given up on having a regular interview with the guy, because we weren't going to talk about particular policies beyond just what he wanted to talk about. And I said, I've covered a lot of presidents. I've interviewed presidents. I've covered a lot of politicians. Every politician I've ever known has been they're out in public at the podium. They're very cordial and polite and warm. And then they go backstage and they're a total jerk. Of course, this politician accepted. That's not the case with him. But I said, Mr. Trump, you're the exact opposite. In person, you're so engaging and warm and funny. And then you go out on stage and you turn into a total jerk. I didn't say jerk. And I was like, what is that about? And he did his little duck lips thing, and he goes, I guess I'm not running to be their friend. And I was like, wow, he totally gets it. He's like the most politically sophisticated guy I've ever covered. It was amazing, to that level of sophistication. So, yeah, he's impolitic and stuff like that, but, sometimes you have to break some china.
So one thing that you all might not know about Charlie, but he for a number of years worked at the Drudge Report, which in my opinion was sort of it remains, but was really a leader in breaking down the kind of the stranglehold the media had on news, the traditional media had on news. And in so many ways, Trump likewise has used the internet and social media to completely push the mainstream news aside. And how important is that, especially when you think about it in the context of the Obama years? How important is that, do you think, to his success?
Oh, you can't overstate it. People often talk about, the good old days when Walter Cronkite would be on TV and everybody would listen to him. Yeah, I guess so. Maybe a little bit, but not really. The truth of the matter was that, yeah, everybody tuned into Walter Cronkite, but he controlled all the information. CBS controlled all the information. ABC, NBC, the three networks controlled all the information. And so, I think that because there wasn't all of these avenues of communication that we have today, people were just content with that. And so they settled for that. But does that mean that it was better, or that it was good, or that it was truer? I don't think so at all. And I get it. It's really messy today, and it can be very confusing. And I can't see everybody here because of the lights, but I'm imagining everyone in here is probably 20 years younger than me. The way you all consume news, I don't even understand it. I mean, I look at my kids, and the way that that they get their news on Snapchat or whatever. It's mind-boggling to me. But that's great. The more news, the better. And if you believe in, if you believe that, that people that people should govern themselves, that people should determine their own governance, then you believe that people are able to educate themselves and learn from themselves. And being a sophisticated newsreader and being able to decipher the stuff that's not real from the stuff that is real is an important characteristic. But I have total faith in people to be able to do that. So yeah, so when Matt Drudge pressed the send button on that first story, that was the first hammer to the wall of that protected journalism, both nationally and locally. And it's been hard, and it's been ugly, and it's been scary for a lot of people, especially people in the media. They do not like this. This is very upsetting. You need to be listening to them and them alone, you know, which if you know them personally, it's even funnier. But yeah, it is terrifying. It's difficult, but and it's untidy. That's the thing, is it's messy. But isn't a lot of things in life are kind of messy. You have to make make decisions for yourself. By the way, there was a terrific, I don't know if, this is a great thing. See, Walter Cronkite couldn't do this for you, what I'm about to do for you. You can go online on Google, which is where I go, and you can type in William Barr, religious liberty, and Notre Dame, and pull up the speech that he gave about a month ago at University of Notre Dame about religious liberty. It is one of the finest speeches I've ever heard anyone in government give in my lifetime. And he talks about, and literally, if the founders were just suddenly rose from the dead and lined up right here, and they heard his speech, they would think he just picked up right where they left off. It's that intelligent and that profound. Of course, he was then accused of being a religious bigot in the media for doing this, for raising the alarm about threats to religious freedom. But one of the things that he talked about, that was because he's Catholic, which kind of proved his point. Anyway, what was interesting about it was he talks about the idea of self-governance, and how self-governance is not just the idea that we can choose who our leaders should be, the mechanics of that. Self-governance also means that we govern ourselves in our behavior, and the more we govern ourselves in our behavior, the less we need a big government up here to govern it for us. And it's a simple point, but I think a very important point. I wish more people understood that point today.
I'd like to go ahead and open it up for questions. I think we've got some folks that would like to ask some questions.
Hey, thank you for being
Derek.
here.
And if you don't mind just telling us your name, where you're from, and what you're studying.
Great. Mr. Hurt, thank you for being here. My name is Derek Rocky. I'm from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, the capital of Pennsylvania. I'm studying politics and policy, graduating in May. So I have a question for you about the news and what you do at the Washington Times. I know a lot of other news stations, whether it's a newspaper or a radio station or a TV show or TV station, they often cater to their viewers to make more money. You're in the business of making money. So how do you at the Washington Times, being a reporter, not cater to just what people want to hear, but cater to what people need to hear?
That's a great point and a very important question that I think is not being handled very well by most people in my profession. And it is tough, and it's been a special burden of the Washington Times, just because when you're suddenly competing with all of these other online, the Washington Times has been around for 35 years and has been covering. We have the news section, and then we have the opinion section. I'm in charge of the opinion section. The news section is straight down the middle. Obviously we cover things that maybe other people don't cover. Because they're just not aware that they're important stories, like about issues of life and things like that, that a lot of newspapers are genuinely hostile towards. But we care about it, but we cover it right down the middle. Obviously, in the opinion section, it's a different matter. But it is a real problem, and I think it's in particular a real problem when you and obviously I'm biased. I work for Fox News. I think Fox News does a spectacular job of making sure that all sides are represented in every package they do. And I know that a lot of people that I agree with politically sometimes get frustrated over having to listen to somebody that they don't agree with. But I always say to them, the difference between you and the person watching MSNBC or CNN is the fact that you're being forced to listen to that other opinion that you don't agree with. And I don't know how much you guys are paying attention to the impeachment stuff. Most people have more serious things to occupy their minds with. But if you want to look and see a terrible divide, and it goes to exactly what you're talking about in coverage today, you watch the impeachment stuff, and then you turn on CNN or some of these, or MSNBC, or even other outlets that are so feverishly, blindly opposed to President Trump. It's the disconnect is just, it's truly amazing. And the reason is because, in particular, the case with CNN, they are so determined to curry favor with those viewers who really don't like Donald Trump. And again, I think it's doing a great disservice to good Democrats out there who have good reasons for not liking Donald Trump and want serious debate and discussion about why they don't like him. Instead, they're talking about all of this kind of crazy stuff.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Derek. Who else? Dr. Fisher.
And other students, please feel free to come forward and get in line. Mr. Hurt, Donald Trump talked about draining the swamp when he was elected. In your assessment, in your coverage, what has he done in that regard? And that's hopefully a wonderfully broad question for you.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. And I have to say, if I were to pick something that I was disappointed in about this, about his first term, it's the amount of that has not happened. The amount of swamp draining that I would have loved to have seen that didn't happen. Of course, and again, this is just my personal opinion. I switched over to opinion away from news years ago, so I feel pretty brazen with all this. There are about 5 departments of the government in Washington, cabinet departments, that you could eliminate tomorrow, and it would be 10 years before the average American realized that it was gone. I would start there. But anyway, I do give President Trump a pass for this, though. When you look at the amount of time and the amount of energy that he has spent over the past 3 years dealing with some really outlandish, crazy accusations, and dealing with the Mueller report, now dealing with this whole Ukraine thing, it's amazing he's gotten anything done at all. And I say this somewhat in jest because it upsets people on the other side, but I do sort of wonder, okay, so when this all goes away, the House votes to impeach him, the Senate passes on it and says whatever, and he remains in office. When does he get his first term back? Obviously he does. He won't. But it's a real frustration. But also I think that it proves when I look at the forces that are arrayed against him to thwart any effort, all of his efforts to change Washington, it really kind of proves his point that the place is kind of ungovernable.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming. My name is Meredith Minto. I am a government politics and policy major. I just have a lighthearted question. What's the most fun or enjoyable story that you've covered in your time in news?
Trump. I mean, honestly, talk about a guy. If Shakespeare were alive today, I think, and you know, Shakespeare did his wonderful histories that were based on real characters. He would do a history on Donald Trump because it is there's so much humor in it. There's so much drama in it. There's so much rage in it. I mean, it's whatever you're looking for. And it's the saddest thing to me is that the number of people in my profession who have completely lost their ability to laugh at the guy. I mean, like the other day, he was standing there out on the sidewalk. You know, he's done this. He's set up this thing where he now answers questions as the Marine helicopter is whirring in the background. And the whir, because of the big fuzzy boom mic that hangs down, it picks up every word he says, but it can't. But because of the whirring of the helicopter, that drowns out the questions even that the reporters get. So when you watch these press conferences now, you don't get a word from anybody but him. And it's intentional, by the way. He knows what he's doing. And he goes out there and they're asking him about the China trade war. And he's like, how come nobody has done this before? How come nobody's ever decided to get into, you know, to call China out on all these problems you say exist with trade with China? And he says, I guess because, and then he looked up in the clouds and he goes, I'm the chosen one. And of course, you know, I mean, he comes back and he comes back and he turns CNN on and they're like, could you see he compared himself to Jesus? Could you believe this? And you're like, first of all, when did you start sticking up for Jesus? Thank you, I appreciate it, but when? And second of all, when did you lose your sense of humor? It was hilarious. He was being funny, but nobody in my profession, they've lost their funny bone. It's very sad, but I love the question.
Thanks.
I just wanted to thank you again for coming here today.
Thank you.
My name is Dorian Porter, politics and policy major, but I had this specific question that's going on in Washington right now. So with the impeachment process, do you believe that there's any wrongdoing on the side of Donald Trump's party, or do you believe there's wrongdoing inside of the Intelligence Committee and all that?
You're going to get me in trouble. Yeah, I mean, I guess. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't, like, ask another country to investigate your political opponent. I don't like that. I don't. But on the other hand, Donald Trump's entire political career has been defined by his political opponents engaging with foreigners, foreign governments, to try to thwart his election. So, you know, and I don't know how much of this you all have followed, but this whole thing about the Steele dossier, which was this report that had all this salacious, scandalous stuff in it, all that stuff was paid for by the Clinton campaign and collected from sources in Russia.
Totally fake.
And it's totally fake, although there's a new standard in journalism now. And this to me, this is the most important thing that you can know about today. They say, well, no, it's not false, it's just unproven. Unproven? That's our standard now in journalism for publishing something, is whether, well, we can publish it because it's unproven. It's unproven, that doesn't mean it's wrong. I'm not even explaining this as demonic as it is, but it is so, it is the game over for journalism if our new standard is, oh, well, no, it's not wrong, it's just unproven. Oh, so we're going to talk about it anyway. Anyway, point being, Trump's entire political career has been defined by people doing exactly this to him. And then, and the other thing was weaponizing investigations. You know, Trump was trying to weaponize an investigation, and what is the entire impeachment thing has been an investigation that's been weaponized. So I don't like it. I don't think that it's the best way to do politics. But I also understand how he felt comfortable doing it. It's all he's known in terms of politics.
Is it impeachable?
It is absolutely not impeachable. It's not remotely impeachable. It's foreign policy. And then let's not forget that it also didn't happen. There was no quid, and there was no quid pro quo. There was no quid or quo, and so, and even if there had been, it wouldn't be impeachable. It's lunacy. And if you get a chance to hear Newt Gingrich talk about the difference between Tip O'Neill when he pursued the Nixon impeachment, where everything was led by the facts, and politics took the rear of the train. And then, and it's really interesting to hear him talk about what he did wrong during the Clinton impeachment. He said he tried his best to keep the politics behind. But I mean, there were real articles of impeachment, perjury, suborning perjury. These are things that people go to jail for. There were real crimes that we know what they are that were leveled against President Clinton. He was disbarred. These were real charges. But the politics car got right up there, right next to the fact investigation, and that destroyed the Republicans. And they lost seats over it because they allowed that to happen. This time, the investigation is in the caboose, and the entire thing has been run by politics. And that's why I think that it's not impeachable. I think it fails, and I think it hurts Democrats.
Thank you, Dorian.
Hello, my name is Ryan Noblett, and I am a student in International Relations Strategic Intelligence. So we can all basically acknowledge the politicization of the modern news media, even though they fail to acknowledge it themselves. And one thing that comes up a lot, at least that I think about, is bias. And everyone has a bias. We'd be wrong to say that we don't. But I'd like to ask you personally, in your reporting that you've done, what steps you would take to limit your personal bias, and how you would go about, like, what in your opinion, how do we fix the modern news media to at least get people to acknowledge what their biases are going into reporting? Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. That's a great question. And I remembered, like I said, the reason I'm gotten into opinion now is because I found it increasingly difficult to ignore my bias. And you're exactly right. Everybody has bias. Everybody has prejudice. And if you don't believe you do, then you're in trouble because you do. And it is important. And that, I learned from the best editors on earth, you have to question it constantly, and you have to make sure that you're being unfailingly fair to people, especially if you don't agree with them. But you also have to make sure you're not overly, that you don't tilt the other way either. But the adage that I learned from a great newsman, probably the best newsman I ever worked with, a guy named Melvin Claxton, was you kill them with fairness. And if that is your lodestar for reporting, then that's who you want to look for when you're reading stuff and you're trying to get the news. The people who are willing to kill them with fairness.
Nice. Thanks, Ryan.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I have a height deficiency. Hi, my name is Caroline Reinhardt, and I'm in politics and policy. And my question is concerning how are we going to start seeing fundamental issues being addressed with the impeachment going on? Unfortunately, we are seeing massive issues concerning the opioid epidemic. I come from Ohio, so we're seeing a lot of issues with human trafficking. My mom, she had an incident at a Walmart. So it's affecting people, and the Democratic debates are concerning pre-K and universal pre-K. So I guess my question is how is journalism going to start with everything that is going on, and with this with this election cycle? How are we also going to be seeing them address these huge issues?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And honestly, if I had to pick a choice right now, it's why I think President Trump gets reelected, is because he talks about those issues and he's concerned about those issues. You may not agree with what he's doing or think they're as important as he does, but he is addressing those things and he's trying to address them. And I think that when you juxtapose that to all of the impeachment stuff, it's a loser for Democrats. Again, the reason I don't want Democrats to do it is because I want Democrats to be, I want a good, honest loyal opposition who is effective at keeping the other side honest and straight. But when they're spending all their time doing this, and Donald Trump can sit over, like yesterday, he opened a factory in, was it in Louisiana or, yeah, in Austin. He opens a factory down there, goes to the ribbon cutting, and then just talks about how Democrats in Congress are doing this impeachment stuff. It's a bad look for Democrats.
Hi, I have a high proficiency. But anyway, my name is Elijah Aubry, and I'm from New Hampshire, and I study international relations, politics, and policy. And I was wondering, if you were our age again, what piece of advice would you give to our age group and to yourself?
If I were to what?
If you were our age group again, what piece of advice would you have given yourself?
Funny, I would.
He's got a child your age.
And it's so funny because I
give her advice.
I listen to her because she's so much smarter than I am. I think, and this goes back to what I just absolutely love about every time I encounter Liberty folks, students. The storytelling, learning to tell stories, and that includes writing, the ability to learn to write and to write lucidly. And obviously, if you're a law student, you're learning how to write brilliantly because everything has to be, it's like mathematical. It has to be so clear. And if you master that, you are going to have so many advantages over other people. The other thing is that I think is so important, and I think people here know this, is believing in something, and believing in something real, and pursuing that. And whether you're going into law school because you want to ensure that the judicial system is fair to all people, especially people that don't have money, that's awesome. Believe in it and go for it. If you believe that you want to put people in jail because they commit crimes against other people, and that's what you believe in, that's awesome. Believe in it and go for that. And I think there's so many, cynicism that pervades almost every aspect of our society, especially I feel like in a lot of higher education today. Cynicism is the cheapest, dullest, lamest, laziest way out I've ever heard of. It's sort of like, it's just a dead end. And so believing in that stuff and figuring out what it is you want to do and believing in it and going for it 110% every day that you will win every time.
Thank you, sir. It looks like we've got three more, and
Can I just add, you'll win every time after losing 100 times. But after all, victory is simply a success after a multitude of failures.
Let's see if we can get through these last three real quick, so everybody gets a chance.
Hi, Charles. Thank you
Hi.
so much for coming. My name is Chris. I'm an international relations and strategic intelligence major. And I was just wondering, seeing as how the media has evolved so much recently, do you ever see them ever returning to their de facto form, say the way they were maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, where they would report mostly non-biased questions? Or do you see the media as stuck in like a permanent spot now?
Thanks.
Yeah, again, I think that a lot of people have, I think the memory of those days when it was a lot more placid I have a problem with a lot of that. First of all, I don't necessarily think that we were being served as well as we should have been. But no, I do think that over time, people will gravitate towards honest, true reporting, and that people, and again, this is not my faith in journalism or reporters, because I have very low faith in them, but my faith in regular people, in normal, intelligent, honest people who seek the truth and want to know the truth. And I do think that that we will see an increasing gathering around those kinds of outlets.
Great question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Erin Cooper. I am a pre-law major here. Nice. And my question is, about the media, and Trump is very different, and I consider myself a moderate Democrat, and on behalf of them, we still think Trump is funny, and
That's good. You have a leg up on other Democrats right there.
yeah. And so
I should say Democrat politicians. I don't know any Democrats who are twisted in knots the way the politicians in Washington are.
Yeah, but okay, my question is essentially, where is the line? Because he did freeze $400 million from a foreign aid in exchange for political gain. So where do you think the line is that he has to cross before he's impeachable, if that's not enough?
Yeah, good question. First of all, I guess my first thing is, why are we giving $400 million to Ukraine? That's a lot of money, and I don't know if when I think of like the single mom at home working 2 jobs, why her tax dollars are going to something like this is just beyond me. But that said, obviously all of Washington, Democrats and Republican politicians in Washington all agree that we want to give $400 million that people earned to Ukraine. That's fine. But and at every step of the way, I would like there to be more debate about these things. But the problem is sussing out the line where, why was he holding up that money? Why was it because he's a cheapskate? Because he's definitely a cheapskate. Was it because of all of, he was wanting to get a political favor? Or was it because he was under pressure to go to Ukraine and get them to investigate corruption, which is what he thinks he was doing, is I'm getting them to investigate corruption. Oh, and don't forget the Joe Biden thing. There was corruption there too. And so finding where that line is sort of impossible. And I don't know, and as a political matter, while I do think Democrats in the House probably will find him guilty of this, I don't think it's going to fly in the Senate.
Great question.
Thank you.
Great question. I would love to get this last one in. Is this okay, Ashley? Can we get one more question? All right.
Thank you for being here. My name is Dion Anthony, and I'm a strategic intelligence major. Now, I consider myself a Trump supporter per se, but how can we get more people in the African American community kind of like, because the media is so against Trump, and back at home, like how can we get them on board per se and see him that he's not a racist or an awful man?
No,
thank you, sir.
A great question. And I think I don't know the answer to that, but I know for certain that Republican politicians and Democrat politicians have sort of divided voters by race for a long time, and they talk to voters based on their race, which I find reprehensible. At least, I know one thing for sure, you have to ask. And that's one of the things I like about Donald Trump, is he's asking, he's working very hard to court all voters, even voters in a demographic that Republicans usually totally ignore stupidly, which is insulting on a whole nother level for them to do that. So at the very least, I don't know the answer to it, but I do know this, that trying is a really good start.
All right, well, listen, Charlie, thank you so much for sharing
Thank you
this
all.
time. And I don't
Thank
think
you
you
all
have
for
anything else you
coming.
want to say, but
And for having me.
and I hope you'll come back.
Yes, definitely.
Hope you come back. And also, as we close, he's got books up there in the front if you all would like, and I think he'll stick around and sign some of them out front. I'm going to ask Susan Patrick to come up real quick, close us out with a prayer. I'm sorry we went over a little bit over, but I really did want to get all the questions. So thank you guys for being patient.
All right, let's pray. To Heavenly Father, God, thank you for allowing us to live in a country where we can have these amazing conversations, we can disagree with one another, but at the end of the day, we all get the opportunity to serve you. And Lord, I ask a special blessing on each one of the individuals that are in here as we start to head out for the Thanksgiving holiday break. Lord, I ask a special blessing of safe travels and mercy and just a time of rest and fellowship. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.
Amen. All right, class dismissed. Thank you.